What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so today is November 19th, 2024. So it occurred to me that the Malice at the Palace was exactly 20 years ago today, November 19th, 2004. I don't know where you guys were at that time, but I vividly remember where I was on that day. For some reason, I distinctly remember my whereabouts at that time. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe I was at a TGI Fridays that evening, and they were playing the game on a monitor at that time. This is right before social media really took off, right? So you didn't go online and see people blogging about it. Matter of fact, blogs had just become a thing at that time, And to be honest with you, the people who tended to be on social media at that time were more of I guess what you would call the intelligentsia community. Those were a little bit more well-to-do, because a lot of people still didn't have the means to have computers or have access to computers or laptops or social media. And, hell, I would say not everybody still had cell phones back then. Most, but not all. But anyway, the game was on. It's early in the season. So it's not a lot of buzz for this game, but it's some. The Pacers were, at that time, the best team in basketball. This might have been Reggie Miller's best shot to win a championship. Ron Artest was playing the best basketball of his career. If I remember correctly, at that time, he was averaging over 24 points a game. He was a reigning defensive player of the year. He's on the verge of becoming an all-star. Ben Wallace, of course, was considered the premier defensive player in the league. Some people argue he should have won Defensive Player of the year before when they gave it to Ron Artest. There's a good argument for that, since the Pistons won a championship, famously upsetting the Lakers. But the Pacers are beating the Pistons by like 15 or 20 points with like a minute to go. Now, when I got home, it was about a couple minutes before this. The Pacers are up. They're going a little bit of a run. Like I said, they're up by 15 or 20 points, which at that time is a damn near insurmountable lead, considering that teams were only averaging around 92, 93 points a game. It was a totally different NBA. They shot threes, but, the game was more about, at that time, points in the paint, winning the rebounding battle, who had the superior post play, and a little bit about the three ball. But to me, it was a more well-balanced game. But anyway, enough of that for right now. Ron Artest fouls Ben Wallace. I don't know what was going on with Ben Wallace. I heard that he had some personal things going on at that time too, compounded by the fact that we're losing to the Pacers at home, and compounded by the fact that I think he felt like he was getting fouled and he wasn't getting the calls. Whatever the case may be, he pushes Ron Artest halfway across the goddamn court. Now, remember, Ron Artest is a strong dude. It's the same guy that broke Michael Jordan's ribs in a pickup game when Michael Jordan was getting back into shape to come back and play basketball for a third time with the Wizards. The fact where it temporarily derailed Michael's comeback, and Jordan was never the same after that rib injury. So Ron Artest was a strong dude. But Ben Wallace is one of the strongest players in history of the NBA. To me personally, I think you could argue he's one of the top 5 strongest players after Wilt Chamberlain, after Artis Gilmore, after Shaquille O'Neal, and after maybe possibly somebody like Nate Thurman or Jason Williams. He's in that category. Okay, when I say Jason Williams, I'm talking about the power forward. Anyway, the bench is empty, and there's a ruckus, which is something that we've seen before, but it's something that you look at. Ron Artest jumps on the scorer's table. He climbs on the scorer's table, and he's laid out. And, I guess he's calming himself down, right? Some idiot, some buffoon throws beer at him, right? Throws beer at him, some inebriated idiot. Ron Artest loses it and jumps into the stands and goes after this guy. He's trying to throw punches at him and throw punches, and then other fans throws things at Ron Artest. Now, at this time, remember, there were starting to become more and more incidences with fans interfering with play. I think it was the year before the Bartman incident with the Chicago Cubs, right? Now, that wasn't intentional, and it wasn't a maliciousness thing going at him, but, you start seeing this fraying of deteriorating relations, I would say, between fans and the players. Some of it had to do with, I would say, the perception that players were entitled, players didn't appreciate fans, players were making exorbitant amount of money. Their salaries had risen tremendously over the years, whereas the average rate or wage for the regular guy, you want to call it like that, was stagnant or even falling behind per inflation. Because if you notice, it wasn't guys in the front row that were involved in it. It was people, I would say, from the third row back. So it's like the further you went back and the less money per year you made, the angrier the fan was. I'm just saying, it was a little bit of a class thing there, a little bit of a rebelling against the elites, or what you see as, those who have means, and there was a little bit of that. There was also a lot of racism involved, right? A lot of that. Because if you look at the video footage on YouTube, right, when the Pacers players and the assistants and personnel, when they're going and they're trying to scurry to the back, going to the tunnel while fans are pummeling them with food and all types of shit. If you look at the footage, they're throwing things only at the black players. That's not cap on my part. Look at it. They're throwing things only at the black players and the black assistants. The white guys, for the most, just about everybody, they're not getting touched. So there was definitely a racial component there. We saw that with the Bo Galata brawl in 1996, when, and this is with police, they arrested everybody, but they released all of the white participants and the black ones were jailed. But anyway, back to this situation, man. So Ron Artest is into it. He's getting into it. Then Steven Jackson gets into it. Jermaine O'Neal punches, I think it was Jermaine O'Neal, punches a stupid, idiotic fan who's banned forever from their court, home court. He gets on the court. Jermaine O'Neal, if I remember correctly, punched him in the face. But I think he kind of slipped. So he didn't really get a full impact on the guy, because I think if he did, Jermaine O'Neal probably wouldn't be he would have completely been banned from the NBA. There would have been another, I think, Rui Tomjanovich, Kermit Washington situation, but maybe worse. This was an ugly, ugly spectacle to watch. And I remember being completely shocked at what I saw, because we'd never seen anything like it before. And thankfully, we've seen nothing like this since. And at the end of the day, you knew that this was a game changer. A game changer. And literally a game changer. Because there were already rumblings about, the NBA has gotten a little bit too ghetto. And I'm not saying that to be disparaging from my point of view. I'm saying that's what people were saying. Sports radio, and even hinted at It was even being hinted by some people on television. But that, I mean, you remember at that time, uh, home courts were playing hip hop music more. Remember, everybody had cornrows back then. Cornrows, or they grew out their hair and had afros. Tattoos. Uh, Remember, Allen Iverson had been a pariah when it came to the media. David Stern, far more conservative than Adam Silver. Far more. Like night and day. Matter of fact, David Stern, I would say, was probably a Reagan Republican, whereas Adam Silver is blue and pink. But anyway, it's through the dress code. So it was already this element where we're losing white fans. Ever since the Michael Jordan era, ever since the days of Michael and Magic and Larry and Charles, and you still had a few dinosaurs left. Karl Malone was still in the league, but just about out. Matter of fact, no, he was gone. He was gone then. He was out. There was a decline in ratings. Was it the style of game? Was it? Maybe, possibly. They lost a lot of casuals because everybody don't like the slow, grinded out, half court milk. Gotta milk the team for every point that you work. You didn't have all these easy buckets. And the final score would be, I don't know, 79-77, 71-69. The game had grind to a halt, especially in the Eastern Conference. And it wasn't as appealing to most fans. Now, to me, I'm a weirdo. I love defense. I love Dennis Rodman. I love Dennis Johnson. I love defense. Give me 1999 NBA all day, where the highest scoring team is the Kings and they're averaging 100. That was considered like really, really high scoring. Give me that NBA. You know why? Because the players who were actually scoring 25 points a game, those guys were really great scorers. They had a bag. You just didn't. A guy like Kyle, what's the guy, Kyle Kanat or whatever, that guy wouldn't even be in the NBA back then. Or at best, he would be behind Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr today would average 18 points a game in the NBA. I'm certain of it. He would average at least 15 to 18 points a game. That's how much easier it is for certain players to score. But the fact remains, the Pacers, who had a real shot at winning a championship at that time, and Reggie Miller going out as a champion, that was ended completely. Ron Artest got suspended 86 goddamn games. Steven Jackson, 30 games. Jermaine O'Neal, 15 games. Incidentally, this would be the beginning of the end of Jermaine O'Neal because injuries began to break him down, and a guy who was destined for a Hall of Fame type career, it just didn't pan out for him. Ben Wallace was suspended for 6 games. The brawl was the demise of this Pacers team and this Pacers potential upswing, or at least a string where this team could have potentially competed for championships for at least 3 or 4 years. That was over with. Their roster was decimated, and it killed their playoff chances, and it destroyed Reggie Miller's opportunity, as I said, to go out with a championship swan song. Look, I think the fans and the players were equally at fault here, possibly more the fans. But the players got the blame, for the most part, from the media. And I think this was also an excuse to change the game. They used this, the NBA, as an excuse to make sweeping changes. About a month later, 5 Pacer players and 5 fans were charged with assault and battery. All of the fans involved were banned from the Palace of Auburn Hills. And Steven Jackson's career would go on. Ron Artest's career would go on. Jermaine O'Neal's career would go on, but he was never the same after injuries. Ron Artest was able to rehabilitate himself and become part of a 2010 championship Lakers team. Um, but basketball was forever changed. Slowly, the league began to implement rules to slow down defensive players. Defensive stalwarts like Roger Bell and Bruce Bowen, who were once making their bones as a defensive player, started becoming obsolete because now they were getting called for fouls. Whereas before, the league was allowing them to play tough, hard-nosed defense. They completely got rid of hand checking. Well, they had already got rid of hand checking 10 years before that, but players were still able to use their elbows, to use their body, use their shoulder to dig into the defense. Now they got rid of all of that. So this happened back then. This was happening starting around 2005. They were softening the game, making it easier for perimeter players to score. Also, the league needed a cosmetic facelift. In particular, they wanted certain players to be more of the face of the league because they knew they were hemorrhaging white fans. Let's be honest. Let's not sugarcoat this. They were hemorrhaging white fans. So they made the game more in the vein of European play, which allowed this influx of European players to come over to the league, which already began a couple years before that. Why? Because ever since Larry Bird, there hadn't been a real great American-born player, a white player. Matter of fact, they're hoping that Cooper Flagg is that guy because since Bird, we haven't really seen that great white American player manifest. They haven't seen it. So Steve Nash became the face of the league. You know what I'm saying? 2-time league MVP. I don't think he should have won either two, at least not the second one. Dirk Nowitzki got more shine. His was earned. They made sure that certain teams and certain players were not as emphasized anymore. The 2005 NBA Finals was one of the lowest, at the time, the lowest rated finals in history up to that point. The league lost $400 million in 2005. So all of these were motivations to change the NBA. So the Malace at the Palace was essentially the death of hard-nosed basketball. It was etched in stone then. It was already probably going to be changes, but that justified the NBA making drastic changes to the game. And the game became more and more and more and more watered down and more and more and more watered down to the point where it's where it is today. And tough, hard-nosed guys like Ben Wallace and Ron Artest don't exist. And now you have Chet Holmgren and, Victor Wembanyama, big-ass dude, 7 feet tall, shooting threes. They got rid of the big, scary black buck nigga. They got rid of him. And they jumped the gun with any perceived hostility from players, even as verbal. Look what they did, finding $100,000 LaMelo Ball for saying what he said, I mean, that's something that would have been said easily back then. Shaq cursed on national television. Did he even get fined for that? Maybe, but it was probably like 20,000. But yeah, man, I had never seen anything before like that ever. Like I remember, of course, Vernon Maxwell going into the stands after that fan in '95. But what doesn't get reported is that fan said something about, if I remember correctly, Vernon Maxwell either had a daughter that just died, or she had cancer, or something to that effect. And the guy said something about his daughter. People can say players got to have self-control. At the end of the day, everybody's not Jackie Robinson. And everybody's not going to hold in their frustrations to the point where they have a full head of gray hair by the time they're 40 dealing with the stress. I don't blame, if that was the case, I don't blame Vernon Maxwell one bit for going to the stands and popping them in his mouth, because that's one of the things that's wrong now. I'm not trying to justify violence. I got time for some action. And that's very apropos, that song pop up. But anyway, I'm not a proponent of violence, but one of the problems with our society now is people get away with saying whatever they want to say because they know there's no consequences. But if there was consequences, people would think twice before just saying whatever they think they can say to hurt people. We have an anti-bullying culture, but the people who used to be bullied are now the verbal bulliers, and they're hidden behind quote unquote free speech. That's what they're always screaming, free speech. You know what I'm saying? Which actually doesn't exist on social media. That's just per government. But anyway, this was a horrible moment in history, man, in sports history. And you could argue it was a long time coming, too. It was a long time coming, because the game was becoming more and more physical at that time. The game was probably the most physical it had been at that time since the 70s, or at least the 60s, maybe the 60s. So it was a long time coming, man. You know, but I still think that the NBA jumped the gun changing the league and changing the play, because fans don't, I mean, the younger guys don't remember the old NBA, so they look at us as a bunch of old haters. But the NBA today, it don't even resemble the same league. It don't even resemble it, man. It's like it's a bunch of actors pretending to be basketball players. You know, that's what it seems like. And the sad thing about, like I always say, Giannis Antetokounmpo would be beloved 20, 25 years ago. His game would have fit that era. Well, that's all I got to say about it.